Merkel Media.
What does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
What? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Look, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius Tack Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. Steve.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Mumbai Kutavi.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in
A centuries-long plan for world.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles and Fort Lauderdale?
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Suez.
More fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host,
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. I'm your host, Charlie Robinson. If you're watching us on Rockfin, Odyssey, Band.video, Vigilante.tv, or you are listening wherever podcasts are served, thanks a million. We appreciate the support. You can subscribe to the show. You can rate the show. We'd appreciate that. If you think we've earned 5 stars in a little review, please give it to us. We love, we need it for the algorithms. Thanks to our sponsors that make the show happen. Legal Shield has been in business for half a century. In Canada and the United States, they have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. And what they do is they provide affordable legal protection for those that are on a budget, like all of us, right? How affordable? It's like $1 a day. It's $30 a month. It'll get you access to Legal Shield. And from there, you can have them do all kinds of things. Do you need legal contracts drafted? Do you have a will and testament? You need one. You can't go through life without one. You don't want the state to get involved in your affairs when you're alive. You don't want them to get involved when you're dead either. Then your family has to deal with it. So you got to have a will, power of attorney, both medical and financial. Get those things done. And of course, if you go to a law firm, it'll cost you a couple grand for you and your spouse to get those things sorted out. So my suggestion, if you're interested, do it through Legal Shield. Just do it in the first month. You're going to be paying $30 for it. Knock it all out, then knock all the things out that you need in the first couple of months, and it's going to pay itself off for the next couple of years. I'll tell you what, just go to the website and check it out for yourself. www.don'tgetpushedaround.com is the place to do it, and just see what you think. If you carry a gun, they've got paperwork for you there. If you run a small business and you need a small business legal department, and they can help you out there. If you need Identity Shield, they've got that as well. If you've got a bunch of red light camera tickets or speeding tickets or things like that, send them to your attorney. See what they can do with it. Just try it out. See what you think. So, they tell us equal justice under the law, but I don't think anybody really believes that anymore. They know that if you have a good attorney, things seem to go your way. So if you're interested, don'tgetpushedaround.com is the place to go to find out more about that. Also, thanks to Chemical Free Body, who, Tim James has been on board with me for the last 3.5 years. I appreciate it. I take their products every single morning. I really do. You can take a look. Go to chemicalfreebody.com. See what you think. See if Green 85 is right for you. It looks disgusting. I assure you, it looks every bit as disgusting as you would think it would. Tastes pretty good though, and it's really good for you. And if you're someone like me that maybe doesn't get as many, it doesn't eat as many vegetables as you should, it's nice to have it as a supplement. It takes me 3 minutes in the morning to make this thing and drink it. It's so easy. It's not a time waster. You can fit it into your schedule. I assure you. It's just, have you decided that you're ready to get yourself healthy? Because if you have, Chemical Free Body is a good place to start. Use the promo code MACRO on your way out to save yourself a little bit of money. Hey, before we get started with this episode, are you going to be in New York City September 7th, 2023? Because if you are, this is the weekend of 9/11. If you are, consider coming to the event that we're doing. Billy Ray Valentine is putting it on. I'm going to be one of the speakers there. It's called Free World NYC. You can go to eventbrite.com and just type in Free World NYC and search for it there, or there's a link in the description. We're going to be doing it all day, September 9th in New York City. I'll be speaking. Gardner Goldsmith will be there. John Brisson, Tony Arterburn, Wayne McCroy, Don Jeffries, and Richard Gage. So if you're interested, go check it out. Also, it's all happening, people. For those of you listening and not watching, I have on my brand new It's All Happening sweatshirt. So if you're interested, the merch store's got all that stuff. You know, Alex will tell you. It's all happening. He's not right. He's not wrong. You know, it's all happening. Well, I'll tell you what is happening as well is that and Ukraine. You might have noticed. You might have noticed over the last year that there's some bullshit going on. And when you dig into it, who's instigating it? Well, we are. Not we, this audience. At least I don't think so. But we, the American government. I shouldn't even say we. It's no part of me or you at all. I just live in this country. I didn't pick these shitbag leaders to represent me. I didn't pick Victoria Nuland to represent me in Ukraine. She doesn't represent anything remotely close to what I'm thinking we should be doing. But that's where we are. And part of the reason why we are where we are with regard to the Russia-Ukraine situation is that America and its allies and its consortiums, we've always got to have a balance. And it's not just us necessarily. It's just sort of the world stage, you know, when there's no global communism, the West finances global communism. So there is an enemy to fight against, you know, so because so much happens during wars, money is made and lost, territory is gained and given up, rules change, chaos, obviously death and destruction, a lot of money being made, a lot of people go missing, a lot of bodies get buried, a lot of problems get buried, you know, a lot of things happen during wars. And obviously, most of them are very bad, but there's a reason why they continue to happen. And that is because if you look at this as a global chessboard, as Zbigniew Brzezinski talks about it, you know, if you're moving pieces, you're going to have to move other people off of that space. And that's what war is about, moving people off of that space and occupying it yourself. Plenty of reasons for it. Some good, some manufactured, of course. But when it comes to the problems that the United States sticks its neck into or sticks its nose into, they're all self-induced. These are all problems that wouldn't exist unless we created them. And one of the groups that is at the forefront of creating problems around, well, let's just call it Europe. NATO is a terrorist organization. It is an acronym, of course, so you know it's important. North Atlantic Treaty Organization, started in 1949. Obviously, in the aftermath of World War II, you had a concept. They decided that they were going to be defending the free world against communist aggression. Sounds good, right? Communist aggression. You mean the communist aggression that helped you win World War II? You mean that? Because they came in parachuting in the last year and won World War II. They're fucking delusional. Okay, the Soviets won World War II. If we're going to be honest, Russia did. You know, the groups that make up Russia, the Soviet Union, they're the ones that were doing all the beating. We came in at the very end on the Western Europe, and you know, I'm talking about the European theater, not Pacific, but this idea that America came in and saved the day, that's a myth. that sounds good. And listen, I mean, it was helpful that there was a second front happening against the Germans. It really created chaos for them. They were getting their asses handed to them in the east after Stalingrad went awry. And after they failed to secure the oil fields in Azerbaijan, which was a strategic blunder, of course, they started to get pushed back. And then we came at them from the other side. We again, like I'm out there doing anything. The United States military came at them from another side, and then the war ended, right? So then the major problem with NATO, the major problem that the West had was, okay, we just got rid of the Germans, right? We got rid of this Nazi Third Reich. And we should be happy, right? The war is over. We should be celebrating, and it should be a really great period of peace. And it immediately turned into paranoia. Before it even ended, it was paranoia. We were working with the Soviets, but nobody trusted them, and they didn't trust us either. And listen, the argument has been made, and I would suggest it is an argument worth making, that the bombs in Japan that were dropped were not to club Japan into submission. They were already there, but it was used as a message to be sent to the Soviets that this is what we've got in store for you if you come messing around with us after World War II. And so when you talk about the mission statement of NATO, defending the free world against communist aggression, and it's 1949. You go, really? Like 4 years after the communists help you win this war, you're already pretending that you're terrified of them. Now, was the West terrified of them? Maybe. I mean, they are a formidable fighting unit, or at least they were, and they lost a ton of guys during that war. The Russians were savages when they got into, look, the Germans did horrible things to the Russians, and the Russians didn't forget it when they turned around and marched on Germany. And villages were, the raping and murdering and pillaging that was going on by the Soviets that came west into Germany was savage, right? So I think America had a reason to be nervous. But regardless, whether they did or didn't, again, it goes back to this idea of having an enemy to fight. So whether the communist aggression was real or imagined for this purpose, they were going to pretend that it was a real issue, and they were going to click up countries into a gang, which is what they are, and they were going to free the world from communist aggression, right? So let's talk a little bit about who is a member of NATO. And it stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization, so you would imagine that it is all the countries in the North Atlantic, and you would be correct, but didn't stay that way. And it might be a little false advertising with regard to the name, because last time I checked, Turkey is like in the Eastern Mediterranean, not exactly North Atlantic, but it's a member. So let's go through. Let's mention who these countries are. We'll just go alphabetical order. Albania, Belgium, Bulgaria, Canada, Croatia, Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Iceland, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Montenegro, Netherlands, North Macedonia. No South Macedonia? That's a shame. Norway, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, Turkey, as I mentioned, the United Kingdom, the United States, and lastly, and most recently, Finland. So NATO's original role might have been to fight commies, but now it's just part of the New World Order, using fake justifications for getting involved with wars, such as fighting the terrorists. We've got to fight the terrorists over there so that they don't come home and fight us here. That lie. Humanitarian intervention. We have to get in there, and there's a humanitarian crisis that we probably covertly created in order to give us the justification to use that term humanitarian crisis to come in there and pretend to be the good guys while we set up some backdoor government. Or everybody's favorite, spreading democracy. We're just out there spreading democracy like crazy, like it's cream cheese on a bagel, right? But there are people that have big problems with NATO, and you can't blame them, right? It's not for nothing. And the main problem that most people point to is the constant expansion of NATO, noticeably in one direction and really one direction only, and that is to the east, towards Russia. Isn't that funny? And there were part of the reason why Russia is so distrustful of NATO is because they were promised, as the Soviet Union was falling apart in 1991, they were promised not 1 inch eastward. That was by James Baker, Secretary of State. All lies. Promises never meant to be kept by the serial killers inside the H.W. Bush administration. They never intended to keep these promises. They're psychopathic, lying mass murderers. What are you going to do? Oh, you promised me you weren't going to move 1 inch to the east. Yeah, have you seen the Bush administration, the H.W. Bush administration and that cast of characters? Is there anybody in that group that you would trust? I wouldn't trust James fucking Baker to tell me what he had for breakfast, let alone that he was not going to move 1 inch closer to the east. So, of course, I think the Soviet Union at this time in 91, they didn't have really any choice. They were disintegrating. They were told that this terrorist organization, NATO, wasn't going to expand towards them. They were promised that, but they could promise people this, the same thing if it was a Soviet expansion. Maybe they did. I mean, maybe, there was a counterbalance to NATO during the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, up until the time the Soviet Union fell apart. It was called the Warsaw Pact. And the Warsaw Pact was like the anti-NATO. It was just a consortium of countries inside that Soviet Union sphere. And they're the ones that were part of that and sort of worked as a balance to I don't know, check NATO. Because you should. Because you can't trust them, And so in 91, they said not 1 inch to the east. How long did that last? Well, it lasted until 99. 8 years. Considering what a bunch of shitbag pathological liars the Bush administration is, it's pretty good that you even got 8 years out. I mean, mind you, Bush was out of office a year later. Clinton came in, and it didn't take long. So the first people to expand for NATO expansion was in 99. Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland joined forces there. Took 5 more years until Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia joined. They waited another 5 years before they added Albania and Croatia. 2017, Montenegro, 2020, North Macedonia, and just recently, 2023, Finland got jumped into the gang. Do they want Ukraine in there? I mean, maybe. It sounds like they do, but do they? I mean, all these countries have functioning governments. I think it, goes without saying, I would hope. I have no love for any governments. I'm anti-state. But these governments are at least up and running, functional, and not no option. Ukraine is a shithole. It's a disaster. It's a biolab weapons manufacturer. It's like the house in the neighborhood that's on kind of the outskirts of town that has a lot of extra land, and you can go over and you can go into the back of that guy's house and shoot guns and blow up paint cans and break bottles and do all kinds of gives a shit. It's just a place where you can go and fuck things up and nobody cares and there's no ramifications because it's not really that important. That's Ukraine. You can wash money through there, traffic human beings through. You can run organ harvesting ops. You can build chemical weapons. You can build nuclear weapons. You build chemical biolabs. All that shit is going on there. It's like a carnival for New World Order lunatics where they can go and just do all kinds of, it's Disneyland for them. They can go ride the equivalent of the Space Mountain of Kiev, which is, I guess, just some bioweapons lab where they show you the latest strain of anthrax that turns you into a pile of dust in an hour or something. I don't know, but they're working on all kinds of things. It's very important. It's a very important country to the grifting United States. We know that because they've always had their fingers in there, at least for the last 2 decades. They've been deeply involved. So is Ukraine going to join NATO? Who cares? I mean, not in its current state. It's going to be Vladimir Putin. If they keep launching drone strikes in Moscow, he's going to turn. It's like you get the feeling he didn't really want to do it, because I think that the relationship Russia has with Ukraine is that a lot of these Ukrainians are part of them. So at least some of them are part of them. But I think you're gonna test this guy's patience, and he's going to flatten that place because again, I think you recognize you don't even know who you're fighting over there. You're fighting the Ukrainians, really? Well, I mean, kind of, but who's backing them? NATO. Right? So is Ukraine a member of NATO? No, they're not. And who's backing them? NATO. So are they a member? No. Are they a proxy? Yes. If you're Russia and you've been promised not 1 inch eastward, and now they're talking about making Ukraine a member of NATO, then you put NATO on the border of Russia. Is that going to be allowed? I don't think so. And I think this is ultimately what it's all about. By the way, Sweden's been ratified, so their membership is coming soon. I said that they've only been expanding to the east, but I guess technically they've been expanding to the northeast as well. So we'll see what happens. So there's 5 requirements for membership in NATO. One is that you have no soul. No, I just made that up, but maybe it's 6. Maybe that's the 6th one. Number 1 is devotion of sufficient resources towards military to meet commitments. I mean, you could just kind of run these through your heads with regard to Ukraine. Security of sensitive information. They get an F on that. Compatibility of domestic legislation with NATO cooperation. Domestic legislation in Ukraine, is there any? Isn't it just whatever the United States says it is? Ability to contribute to the organization's defense and missions. I mean, unless you want Ukraine to just be the punching bag, I guess it would qualify. Willingness to settle disputes peacefully. I can't even get this out of my mouth. A willingness to settle disputes peacefully, commit to the rule of law and human rights. That's the 5th qualification to join NATO. It's laughable. They're literally a terrorist organization. They're talking about human rights. You have to value human rights, okay? No. Let's talk about what NATO did in the past, shall we? Because I think it's important to understand about anybody, right? You want to talk about some new person in your life. Oh, well, what did you do in your past? Let me see how that, shaped you into the person that you are today. So with NATO, let's talk about what they were doing in the past, right? They were formed in 1949, right? They part of the reason why they were formed, they say they were there to be a check on Soviet Union. America was leaving after World War II. They had to leave. I mean, they left bases, but you can't just have all your guys there. People had to go home. So part of what NATO was like a watchdog group that could keep an eye on, keep in mind now, at this point, you've got the Soviet Union occupying half of Germany, half of Berlin, it's basically like split down the middle. So there is theoretically the possibility that the Soviets might say, why do we only take half of Germany? Why don't we just take the whole thing? It is kind of weird if you think about it, that for like 4 decades, Germany was split in half. And you would think that would never happen, right? You'd either be all one way or you'd be all the other way. Just the idea of it being split in half, and like East Germany was like the Stasi and your phones were tapped. And if you tried to get over the barbed wire, they shot you and everything. West Germany was like, everyone was living their best life. I mean, after rebuilding and everything, but it was just very, very different. So it wasn't unreasonable for NATO to think that the Soviet Union would eventually kind of expand to the West a little bit more, if for no other reason than to just finalize their takeover of Germany, who they fucking despised, by the way, it's reasonable for them to want to continue to take all that. So I'm not saying that the formation of NATO came out of nowhere. It most certainly was born out of a paranoia that the Soviets would consider that there was unfinished business. And that's a pretty reasonable expectation. But after years and decades went by and none of that happened, NATO was sitting around going, well, we don't really have anything to do. So they created a concept, an Operation Gladio. And we've talked about Operation Gladio here before. For those of you that are maybe new to the show, you can go back in, I don't even know if it's even more than a year ago. We were doing a show on Operation Gladio. There's a lot to know about it, but basically it was a leave behind force that was sort of stationed all over Western Europe, France, Belgium, Italy, parts of West Germany, just little pockets of fighting forces that could be activated if they needed to. If the Soviets decided that they were going to come west, you could activate these forces and they'd engage the enemy, and that would buy you enough time for America to say, all right, let's get on the fucking transport ships and let's go back over there. We're going back to finish this job. So it would buy you a little bit of time. But since that never happened, you had all these stay-behind forces that ended up getting repurposed as covert terrorist cells, okay? 'Cause they had all this training. They were ready to go start trouble, but they just didn't have anybody to start trouble against because nobody was messing with them. So they decided to start messing with people because this is why I hate the state so much. If you give them enough free time, they create enemies. They create problems for themselves for them to go solve, right, with force. So it's never long before NATO terrorist force that's setting off bombs in grocery stores, blowing up the Bologna train station, blowing up, creating shootings and school shootings and things like this. All this stuff, Buffalo supermarket shooting, school, all these things, bombings everywhere. This is all Operation Gladio stuff. This is an operation. Say that NATO is a terrorist organization. I'm not kidding. I'm not being hyperbolic here. They're a terrorist organization. Part of what they did with Operation Gladio cells, and then use them to set off a bomb at the right place at the right time in order to demonize this section of the government of Italy and make them look incompetent and make them look weak or make them look like they're in on it or something, and then force public opinion to vote the other way in order to get the guy in that the NATO and the CIA wanted in all along. And so this is how you do it. Sometimes it's just, you could run the right candidate. And I know I'm sound crazy here. You could actually run a candidate that was worthy of people wanting to vote for and then do it that way. But I know. I'm huffing paint. So that's what they did. They shot up grocery stores, blew up trains, bombed cars. They perfected the art of the false flag. They really, really did. And NATO is amazing at that. And I'll tell you, I've had these conversations with Ole Dammegard. I've had him on this show. I've had him in Mexico when we're just hanging out together about the role of running not just Gladio in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s in Europe, but how that never stopped. And how NATO is running the international terrorist operations, including the ones in the United States, especially the ones in the United States, that NATO is the one running false flag operations, that when you see these school shootings, when you see these massive, these bombings or random gunman goes into all this, the first reports almost always show multiple gunmen, military style dress, military style age, look, that are involved in these. And then they disappear and a patsy gets blamed and everything, and the media moves in and the gets passed. So we see how this happens, and Ole is of the belief, and I am in agreement with him on this. The more I look into it, the more I agree with him that the Operation Gladio never went away. It just moved from Europe to the United States. It's international now. You know, it's just not limited to Western Europe. And so NATO's been linked to the global drug trade. They grant access to that. There's plenty of reports of the drug trade running through NATO bases. That it's a good hub for that. We know that during Operation Gladio, they were deeply involved in political assassinations and the like. There's no doubt that NATO is currently carrying out operations in Ukraine. Hell, we have the Nord Stream pipeline blow up. That was sort of, Seymour Hersh pointed out that was a CIA USA group. Was NATO involved? Maybe not on that one to keep their mouth shut. But listen, this is how they've described NATO like this. NATO was created to keep the Soviet Union out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. Okay. That's how it was described. So let's talk a little bit about the mouthpiece of NATO. You might know it as the Atlantic Council. Now, the Atlantic Council is a non-governmental organization. Started in 1961. It's funded by NATO. When the Atlantic Council speaks, you're hearing NATO. Okay. Just put it that way. That's probably the best way to do it. They are pro-censorship, of course. Obviously, they don't want you talking about the things that they're up to. So they're pro-censorship. It's a military information terror complex think tank that is filled with spooks and CEOs of strategically aligned corporations, defense industry corporations that are like-minded. There's the National Endowment for Democracy is a sponsor of the Atlantic Council. The regime change operation, National Endowment for Democracy. They are a sponsor of the Atlantic Council. They help to finance it. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund finances it. So there's 7 former CIA directors on the Atlantic Council's board of directors. So if there's any sort of like, oh, well, maybe they're not up to no good. I mean, maybe they're just getting together, talking about how to save the country, save the world, really. Go ahead and get that thought, if you ever had it, just right out of your head. Board of directors, 7 former CIA directors are on it. It's funded by the State Department. It's funded by the UK Foreign Office. It's funded by NATO. It's funded by NED. It's funded by the Rockefellers. So again, like, let's not beat around the bush here. NATO is America's global terrorist organization. A site called Wikispooks. Great site, by the way. The Atlantic Council is legitimacy of U.S. policies and neoliberal world audiences and academia for the purpose of advancing studies legitimizing Euro-Atlantic interventionalism and Western-backed regime change, spreading the culture and ideological values of imperialism and debunking policies favoring independent development and income redistribution among historically dispossessed and exploited nations and people. So that's what they want. That's how Wikispooks describes them. Deep state, the deep state, NATO, Atlantic Council, a subsidiary of NATO, that their position is to push Euro-Atlantic interventionalism values, including regime change. That's what they do. So when you hear the Atlantic Council speaking, you are hearing NATO speaking. And what the Atlantic Council almost always is talking about is interventionalism and Western-backed regime change. That's the reason why NATO is involved in Ukraine. Very simple. That's what they do. So again, if you're having like the discussion with your normie friends and they're talking about how NATO is a force for good, you need to explain to them, no, they're actually our Western terrorist organization that doesn't have a nation state connected with it necessarily. I mean, it is a consortium of nation states, but it is in and of itself not tied to any one. It's an idea. It's an ideological alignment, not, it claims to be geographical, North Atlantic. Maybe it started that way. And conceptually, I understand where it came out of. They're not picking up NATO members in Africa. Not yet. But again, grab a map and take a look where Turkey is. And you tell me if that's in the North Atlantic, because it ain't. Okay. It is the eastern part of the Mediterranean. It is the gateway to Europe, but it is not in the North Atlantic. So eventually this will, they'll probably expand if they can. I mean, they want to. They're, like I said, they've already filled Finland, fit them into a spot, and Sweden is coming. So they're taking care of that region up north. Eventually, my guess is that they'll come to the south and that they'll be looking for the likes of I don't know, some of the North African countries around the southern part of the Mediterranean. But that's just a guess. I don't know for sure. I'll tell you what I do know. The Atlantic Council hired the guy that created the Call of Duty video game franchise, made him a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and that now this is gonna be a real stretch for you out there. Now the game shows NATO in a favorable light. Isn't that funny? Isn't that weird how it works out that way? Yeah, that's amazing. You take the guy that does the Call of Duty franchise, and again, most of the people that play Call of Duty don't give a flying fuck about NATO. They're never going to be a part of it. They don't know what it stands for. They don't know anything. But it always helps. Always be selling, right? Always be selling that NATO's the good guy. So that's what they're doing. They're selling that it's always the good guy. And listen, if they don't get you in the video game era, they'll get you through Atlantic Council's digital forensic lab. Okay? Let's not forget about that. That's a group that is deeply involved in countering digital hate and all that bullshit, all those buzzwords. So the Atlantic Council is part of NATO, technically separate, but funded by it and a mouthpiece for it. So and NATO, when it's very important that people aren't talking about what they're up to, then they employ the Atlantic Council's digital forensics lab to get to the bottom of the censorship component of it digitally. So when you get banned from Facebook or Twitter because you're talking about Ukraine and Russia and all this stuff, there's a good chance that the banning came at the behest of NATO, who talked to Atlantic Council, and Atlantic Council talked to the social media companies. So because they've got all of them on their board, they're all members of the Atlantic Council anyway. So again, it's just one big gangbang. Let's talk a little bit about the red line that was, the red line for Russia. This is not an inch closer to the east was promised in 91. We see how close they are now, this push towards Ukraine. And it was always believed that Ukraine was a red line for Russia with regard to NATO. Everybody knew that. It wasn't just Russia saying it. NATO knew it too. And even the disingenuous stenographers for power at the Washington Post and the New York Times, even they know it. That if you put a NATO country on Russia's border, you're going to have problems. They're never going to allow that. So that they knew what would happen. This goes back to like, we've got destabilization in 2004 in Ukraine with Soros. We've got the 2014 Yatsar guy with Victoria Nuland. We've got the new version of her coming back again out of the Obama White House, now back into the Biden administration. running ops for them. She's now second in command behind Anthony Blinken, which is terrifying, which means there's definitely going to be a war started. Her husband, Robert Kagan, by the way, if you didn't know her, she's married to Robert Kagan, one of the architects, one of the founders of Project for a New American Century, the guys that were deeply involved in the planning and plotting of 9/11, hardcore Zionists. Victoria Nuland and her husband, Robert Kagan, should die in a Ukrainian prison, both of them, slowly for the rest of their lives for what they've done. So listen, Putin knew what would happen if he allowed Ukraine to create the situation where they could be in consideration for NATO membership. Now, it's been discussed, but nothing has been decided on. Frankly, I don't think it's going to happen. But it doesn't matter what I think, because what will happen will happen. And unfortunately, the types of people that want it to happen are in positions of power. And again, we're talking about drawing NATO into or starting World War III. And there will be people who say, well, NATO doesn't get involved in wars. NATO is a peacekeeping, a defensive mission. Oh, well, let me explain where you're wrong. Let me explain where you're really wrong on that, because that's the sales pitch you get. NATO is a defensive force. They are protecting democracy and all those things, and that they would never be involved in offensive war. It's against their charter. Their charter says that they are supposed to be for defensive uses only. But, listen, it's not like NATO doesn't have a ton of experience invading countries. They do. The idea that they're a defensive force is not true. It's provably not true. And I'll tell you I've had Tony Arterburn on the show. He was in Bosnia in 1999. He said, I can tell you that I saw with my own eyeballs NATO forces bombing. Okay. And the reason why he saw that was because it was happening. 1999, March 24th, Yugoslavia, Bosnia in particular, that region. Tony was there as a U.S. Army Ranger. He was on the ground in Bosnia. He watched it happen. He was there, and then 2 years later, he was in Afghanistan. This is a concept called balkanization. And it is to take a country like Yugoslavia, right? Break it up into three pieces so that it's disoriented. It's lacking in cohesion. It's lacking in, the fighting force is is cut in thirds. You get people fighting with each other. They can't work together towards coming after you. So an idea, a strategy, if you'd like, of a powerful country is all these mid-sized countries out there that could eventually threaten us. Let's destabilize them and break them up into smaller pieces. And then that way, if they're smaller pieces, we don't have to worry about them. So that's what you do. You go in and and obviously I'm simplifying this. There's a lot more to the story of why the 1999 war in Yugoslavia was kicked off, and it wound up breaking the country up into, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and real into three sections actually, and through the last almost 25 years, Serbia, Croatia, these components that used to be Yugoslavia, and when I was a kid growing up, used to be Yugoslavia. Now they're just smaller regional countries that really don't have a ton of force behind them. This was done on purpose, of course. And so I mentioned Tony Arterburn as a Ranger being in Bosnia in 99, watching a NATO-led invasion. He then goes 2 years later, December of 2001, he's one of the first guys on the ground in Afghanistan. Again, watching a NATO invasion. NATO went in. When did September 11th happen? That's kind of a trick question. 2001, right? Do you know when NATO went into Afghanistan? You remember those Afghanis planting the bombs in the building? You remember the Afghan Air Force that took over our Air Force and flew. Oh, wait, no, none of that ever happened, right? They were in Afghanistan on October 7th, 2001. Not even a full month later. It's almost as if they knew it was coming. It's almost as if they were ready to go in from before 9/11 happened. But if you believe that, you would have to be a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist to think that there was advanced knowledge of 9/11, right? That terrorist organizations like NATO might have had advanced knowledge of 9/11. That would make you crazy, right? And so what happened in Afghanistan? Well, a total bullshit war from the start broke out that cost America $5 trillion, lasted 20 years, and humiliated us on the international stage. But other than that, it was great. I mean, it was great if you were the CIA. It was great if you wanted to steal the mineral resources out of Afghanistan. It's great if you wanted to control the opium manufacturing distribution. The CIA controlled that for 20 years. Isn't it weird that right after the Afghanistan invasion, heroin production went through the roof, and all of a sudden we started to have heroin problems all over the world in general, and America in particular? That's unusual. It's like it was made to happen, because of course it was. By the way, in Yugoslavia, just in case, just so that we depart from this Rumsfeldian mistakes were made, NATO targeted hospitals and civilians in Yugoslavia. Okay? Hospitals. That's a war crime. That's a war crime to do that. But again, it wasn't just Yugoslavia and Afghanistan that NATO led invasion forces about. Let's not forget March 25th, 2011, Libya, bombed to the Stone Ages for, I mean, what can best be described as banking ambitions to remake Africa with a different banking apparatus. You know, I could have told Gaddafi that would have happened. I mean, I'm sure he knew too. I'm sure that I'm sure that he wasn't surprised that he got some democracy spread on his ass. But that's what happens when you get on the wrong side of NATO. When you do something that they deem to be unacceptable. This concept that we are sold, that NATO is a defensive force, is provably a lie. I've just mentioned 3. Let's mention the 4th. Ukraine, obviously. Ukraine is the 4th. February 2022. NATO backs Ukraine in the current war, provides them with billions of dollars of weapons and money and training and cluster bombs and depleted uranium, all war crimes. So again, who's the bad guy here? Is Putin? Putin's the devil? Putin's the worst guy? Look, I'm anti-war, so I'm not in favor of any wars, okay? Let's not pretend like Vladimir Putin just woke up one morning and decided it was time to invade Ukraine. You know, there's a whole lot to this story. There's a whole lot that I'll never understand about this story. There's tensions that go back over 100 years between these countries. There's a lot of reciprocity between like the people. You know, there's a lot of ethnically Russian people living in Ukraine that feel disconnected and vice versa. It's hard for us as an American to understand what that's really like. It'd be like, there's nothing to compare it to. It'd be like if we took Baja California from the Mexicans and we're like, listen, just geographically, it's close to California. And they're like, I mean, are there a bunch of Californians living there? And you're like, well, maybe. So I don't know how to compare it to the United States, but the idea that that NATO is just sort of sitting on the sidelines, hoping to defend, help everybody that's getting invaded by these big bad Russians is laughable. And NATO is fueling this. You know what I mean? NATO is the reason why it's going on and on and on. The Ukrainians and the Russians wanted to have a peace negotiation. Victoria Nuland said that is not happening. They sent Boris Johnson there to kill that deal. You remember that? Like a year ago. They sent him, he said, Boris Johnson showed up and said, you guys talking about peace? We're not doing that. We're not doing peace. Grab a helmet, Bojo, you fucking clown. So NATO's always had sort of a bad reputation in Europe. I mean, I think the Europeans know what NATO really is. France certainly does. France has a very uncomfortable relationship with NATO. France expelled the European headquarters of NATO after Charles de Gaulle was almost assassinated on multiple occasions. They were trying to take that guy out, and they knew it was NATO. The French were like, we know who it is. He described it as the secret warfare of the Pentagon. So it's like, we know who's doing this. It's NATO, aka Washington, D.C. So Gladio never really went away. And listen, if we're going to go down this rabbit hole a little bit, we might as well go a little bit further. Don't underestimate the Vatican's role in Gladio as well, okay? That never gets talked about, but I mean, at the very least on the money laundering side through the Vatican Bank, at the very least. Now, you've got Gladio happening, we're talking in the 60s, 70s, 80s, Western Europe, but heavily Italy. And so, of course, you're going to have the two factions that run Italy involved, the mafia and the Vatican. And this is right up their alley. But both of them. If you think by the way, if you think the Vatican is some like holy institution, you're out of your mind. Like if you don't know who the Vatican is. Washington, D.C., City of London, Vatican City. All three supranational, outside of the reach of the nations in which they are in. They are their own entities. So, man, the 70s and 80s were crazy in Europe. Gladio bombings were going off all the time. The relationship with the Vatican was working. Listen, the Vatican had a relationship with the Third Reich. Okay, Third Reich, NATO. We'll get to that in a second, because I want to explore that topic about when I say Operation Gladio never went away. Did the Third Reich ever go away? I don't know. But let's talk about this though. Just as far as like who's running the show here at NATO. Well, the head guy is the NATO Secretary General, right? And right now it's a guy named Jens Stoltenberg, a soulless Norwegian cocksucker who, NATO Secretary General since 2014, very tight with Bill Gates, was the director of Gavi, the Gates Vaccine Initiative, from 2002 to 2005 before slipping his way into NATO. He's World Economic Forum, of course, former Prime Minister of Norway, Atlantic Council, obviously. But the thing that's interesting about guys like Jens Stoltenberg and the office of NATO's Secretary General in particular is that NATO doesn't select who those guys are. They may say they do. They may say they've had a meeting and that they've decided who's going to replace essentially the CEO, the Secretary General. But that's all bullshit. Whatever process they say is actually at work to decide who the head of NATO is, whatever they tell you is not true. Who really picks the head of NATO's Secretary General, is Bilderberg. That's who picks him. Okay. They have the meeting at the Bilderberg conference, and the future Secretary General has attended Bilderberg shortly before being, quote, elected, whatever, every single time. That's where the decision is being made. If you want to know who is going to be the next head of NATO when there is a changeover, take a look at some of the newer members of Bilderberg, newer attendees of Bilderberg, because they parade them there to get the approval of everybody and get everybody comfortable with the person, take a vote. Is this the guy you think? We could take Jens Stoltenberg. We could take him. Is he a soulless lunatic that's willing to start World War III? Well, he did run Gavi for Bill Gates. Like, oh shit. Okay. All right. Yeah. Oh, he qualifies. Yeah, he'll be good. So Bilderberg picks. But again, not surprising. I mentioned the Third Reich. And, I think there is a question I ask Is NATO the Fourth Reich? It's a crazy question, right? Sounds crazy. It sounds crazy the first, me just throwing that out there. But let me ask you, do you think a case can be made that the Third Reich, that Germany lost the war, World War II, that Germany lost the war? Undeniably, Germany lost the war. It was destroyed and pummeled. But that the Nazis didn't, really? I mean, paperclip is a thing. We had Operation Paperclip. They had Operation Odessa. It was sort of like another Operation Paperclip with people going the other direction. Scientists were taken. Generals were taken. I think I can make a case that NATO is the Fourth Reich reconstituted. It's invading countries under false pretenses. That's what NATO does. That's what the Third Reich was doing, right? Poor countries, typically poor. NATO likes to pick on poor countries like Afghanistan, one of the poorest countries in the world. Yugoslavia, one of the poorest. When Yugoslavia wasn't poor, it's beautiful, but it's not an economic powerhouse. Libya was probably the most I think technically was the most prosperous country in Africa. Can't have that. Right. Ukraine is a shithole. So NATO does, a little bit about what the Third Reich wanted. Lebensraum, what's that? The living space? Is that the German term for it when they say, well, we're just taking all these countries because we need living space for our people. Is NATO not doing that? They're expanding. They're just doing it without tanks on the street. War crimes wherever NATO goes. Rapes, murders, human trafficking, obviously wars. Wherever NATO goes, war crimes follow. Kind of like the Third Reich. A totalitarian mindset, right? That's what NATO has. Supremacy, aggression, strategic planners, surveillance, propaganda, control of national interest. Who am I talking about? Am I talking about the Nazis or am I talking about NATO? What's the difference? Operation Paperclip, again, brought a lot of very well-connected Nazis into high-level positions inside the American government. We didn't put them in POW camps. We put them in the Pentagon. You understand? They didn't go to Guantanamo Bay. They went to the State Department. They started NASA, for fuck's sake. Okay? We didn't put these people in prison. We put them to work for us. So is it surprising that some of that Nazi ideology would rub off on America? No. It's not. The only surprise would be if it didn't. Again, why would they stop being Nazis? They've been shown that there are no repercussions for their actions. They literally should have been lined up and shot. And instead, they were put in positions of power inside the United States government. I mean, NASA was started by a literal Nazi, okay? The head of the V2 program, Wernher von Braun, was involved in the creation of NASA, along with some other guys like freaking, what's his name from Scientology? L. Ron Hubbard from Scientology, Jack Parsons, Suicide Squad, all those guys, deeply involved in occult symbolism, Nazi ideology, and rockets. What could go wrong, right? Well, more comparisons between the Third Reich and maybe the Fourth Reich. Think of the mentality that surrounds NATO in general. It is a gang mentality. If you fight one of our members, if you're a country and you get into a dispute with one of our countries and you fight them, you got to fight all of us. It's in the charter. They're legally required to participate in Fight Club. If you're a member of NATO, you have to fight. NATO has killed civilians during its bombing runs over the years, even though its charter called for it to be a defensive group, not a offensive quasi-military world army, whatever the fuck they are these days. Here's a quote from Gennady Zyuganov, Russian Communist Party leader. He said, "We must be well aware that a new army has gathered against us. A fourth European NATO Reich, where 30 countries united all their regiments and armies." The Russian guy called it too. Fourth European NATO Reich. Yeah. Guess what? Here's some homework for you. It's fun homework. It's not hard. Get in front of a search engine and type in NATO's new headquarters and take a look at what it looks like. You know how like you find like, I don't know, like the runways at Denver at DIA airport, they like show up and you're like, the runways make a swastika. Like, is this okay? You know, like these building designs, and you go, oh, maybe we overlooked that, or maybe it's practical to have runways. I don't know. You know, there's a lot of airports and places. There's some buildings. You look at them and you go, oh fuck, that looks like a swastika. NATO's new headquarters does not look like a swastika. I will save you that. You know what it does look like? It looks like Nazi SS lightning bolts. Go look at it. 100%. It's a running theme at NATO because, you know, they were headed by Nazis. So it's like, what shall we make the new headquarters look like? It's like, oh, German Nazi SS lightning bolts. Very good. Yeah. Oh yeah. Very good. Yeah. Yeah. Let's do it. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead and please, where's the death head while you're at it? We could do that. Just do the whole, all the SS symbols. I mean, you've got them on your guys in Ukraine already, the Azov battalion that NATO is financing, right? They're financing Ukraine. NATO is. Ukraine has an entire like division that is the most dominant division in Ukraine, the Azov battalion, formed in a nod to Stepan Bandera, who was a Nazi, Ukrainian Nazi during World War II. They're all covered up in SS tattoos, lightning bolts, you know, all that shit. And they're funded by NATO. So again, I'm not just haphazardly throwing like, I think NATO might be the Fourth Reich out of my, you know, I'm not pulling this completely out of my ass. NATO was headed by Nazis. I mean, there were a lot of them in the organization. Don't believe me? Let me talk about a couple of them. Adolf Hitler's chief of the general staff of the army, Adolf Heisinger. He was Hitler's chief of the general staff of the army from 1940 to 1944. He wasn't one of those guys that got on the wrong side of Hitler, got taken out back and shot. This guy made it. He made it through the war. He's a paperclip guy. He was the chairman of NATO from 1961 to 1964. He was Adolf Hitler's chief of general staff from 40 to 44. And then 20 years later, he's literally running NATO. Again, you're like, who is this guy? I've never heard of this guy. You maybe you haven't heard of him, but you know where you would have heard of him? This might have been the reason why he wasn't taken out back and shot. He was the guy that was standing next to Hitler when the Operation Valkyrie bomb went off that didn't kill Hitler. It injured this guy. This guy lived. This guy lived he lived through all of World War II, lived through any sort of Nuremberg trials or anything. He got picked up by somebody and made the head of NATO. So when I say that NATO is a terrorist organization, you go, get out of here with that. And when I say that NATO is the Fourth Reich, and you go, get out of here with that. Please explain to me why Hitler's guy is running NATO. If NATO and the Nazis have nothing to do with any each other, I'll eat my words. But explain to me how this is happening. Maybe it's a one-off, right? Maybe one guy slipped through the cracks. What about Hans Speidel? You familiar with him? Hitler's inner circle. Rommel's chief of staff in World War II. Became senior NATO ground commander from 1957 to 1963. Again, lots of Nazis, high-ranking Nazis, ending up in high-ranking positions in NATO. Johannes Steinhoff, winner of the most prestigious award in the Third Reich, something known as the Knight's Cross of the Iron. This guy won it for the Nazis. Johannes Steinhoff ended up as the chairman of the NATO Military Committee from 1971 to 1974. Are you starting to notice a pattern? The Nazis never left. They didn't lose World War II. They just moved into NATO. And when you understand that, I feel like what's happening in the world with regard to the NATO positioning starts to make a lot lot more sense when you know that the Nazis are actually behind it. They never left. They just changed uniforms. Hey, if you like this episode, you can take the additional step right now of sharing it with your friends and family. If you want to connect with me, the website is theoctopusofglobalcontrol.com, or you can follow me on Twitter @macroaggressions. Thanks, everybody. I'll talk to you again soon.